Sirius's Perspective by Roller Coaster Words. Chapter 156. The War. Magic. Monday the 8th of January, 1979. Please let me come with you, Sirius tried one last time as Remus walked out the door. I'll be fine, Remus told him, smiling in what was probably supposed to be a reassuring way. The door shut behind him, and Sirius listened to the lock click into place. It wasn't that Sirius didn't know that. He did. He knew Remus would be fine. He was just visiting the Auror's headquarters, after all, and though there were plenty of Death Eaters crawling around the Ministry, it wasn't like they were just walking about attacking people. That would give them away. Plus, Moody would be there, and Frank, and Alice, and all the other Aurors who were loyal to the Order. So, of course, Remus would be perfectly safe. Still, Sirius wished he was tagging along. A meeting with Moody could only mean one thing for Remus, another assignment with the werewolves. And though Sirius had assured Remus that the Order was saving him for something, privately, he'd hoped that they would wait a little longer, that they would find some other way to deal with the werewolves, send someone else to put their life in danger for once. But of course, it had to be Mooney. Of course. Remus, for his part, seemed to be somewhere between eager and apprehensive for the meeting. It was the first time Sirius had seen him properly dressed since his mother's funeral. He'd mostly just been sitting around in his pyjamas on the living room sofa, or else laying in bed. Sirius supposed it was good that he was finally leaving the flat after being cooped up for so long. He just wished it was for a different reason. Sirius sighed and wandered into the kitchen, where he began absent-mindedly washing the dishes that had been sitting in the sink all weekend. Lily had stopped by on Saturday to check in on them with a plate of sandwiches as an offering. There were still a few left, though they were now slightly stale, and he sat on the sofa and ate one and stared at the wall. The problem, Sirius thought, was that he didn't know what was normal when it came to grief. Where was he meant to draw the line? To say, "All right, Remus, that's enough laying in bed all day. Time to get up and shower." It made him feel helpless, sitting next to Mooney and still feeling so far away, like the other boy was cocooned, buried beneath thick layers of sorrow that nothing could penetrate. The full moon was due on that upcoming Saturday, and in a twisted sort of way, Sirius was looking forward to it. Since leaving Hogwarts, the Marauders had been apparating, Peter side-alonged, to remote stretches of woodland and spending the full moons there. It was just as much fun as their nights running through the Forbidden Forest, more even, because there were new places to explore, and Padfoot loved exploring with the wolf, especially after everything with Remus's mum. Sirius reasoned that a night with nothing but cavorting through the countryside, free of human worries, would probably do them all some good. But that was Saturday, and this was Monday, which meant that there was still an entire week to get through before Sirius could crawl out of his skin and take refuge in the simple joy of being a dog. Depending on how things went with Moody's meeting, there was no telling on what sort of week it would be. Would Remus return withdrawn, sullen, anxious, eager? The waiting was the worst part. Sirius felt as though he were holding his breath, anticipating the worst while still trying to hope for the best. Whatever happened with Moody, Sirius just hoped that it wouldn't send Remus spiralling even further. He had a rotating guard duty with James and the Pruitt twins throughout the week, which meant he would no longer be around all day to make sure that Mooney showered and ate. If he took a turn for the worst, Sirius would have to start recruiting Lily to come in and check on him more. But Sirius had a feeling that Remus wouldn't like that. He hated feeling coddled. Sirius brushed the crumbs off his trousers as he stood, stretching. There was nothing to be done in the empty flat, unless he fancied reading one of Remus's many books. So he grabbed his keys and headed down to the garage he'd rented, just around the corner. He whistled as he unlocked the door, inhaling deeply. Petrol and leather, sawdust and motor oil. Hello, gorgeous. The cherry-red tank winked at him in the sunlight, and he grinned. She was the exact same model as the bike from the village, a Triumph 650 T120 Bonneville, leather black and shiny chrome with a vivid red paint job. James was keen to add to it. He thought he should be allowed to paint lions and flames on the tank, but Sirius had warned him off, threatening, "If you ever even lay a finger on her, Potter, I swear you'll never see your beloved Nimbus again." Sirius waved his wand to turn on the little wireless radio in the corner. It was already set to his favourite Muggle rock station, and he hummed under his breath as he worked, polishing the tank until it gleamed. He'd spent months poring over Muggle magazines and instructional booklets about motorbike mechanics, until caring for the bike was second nature. He checked the tyres, pressing the little pressure gauge into the valve system and feeling the wear indicator to check the treads. He'd already changed the oil and swapped out the air filter recently, but he figured that with all the hours the bike had spent sitting in the freezing garage that winter, it couldn't hurt to change the coolant. He used a mixture of magic and muggle mechanics to remove the necessary bodywork and get at the drain bolt, placing a pan beneath the engine to let it drain. Once everything was out, he put the drain bolt back and took off the radiator cap, refilling the system carefully with a funnel he'd bought from a muggle hardware store. "There you go, darling." He patted the bike fondly, replacing the radiator cap and making sure everything was put back together before starting the engine. She rumbled to life, growling, and Sirius grinned. He gave her a few minutes to warm up before cutting the ignition, removing the radiator cap once more to check the coolant level. Perfect. With all the ordinary work done, Sirius moved on to the fun part, magical enhancements. He had quite a few ideas in mind. Growth charms, concealment spells, enhancing the headlights to shoot flames. But first and foremost, Sirius was going to make his motorbike fly. It had been months of research, of trial and error. Muggle motorbikes were simply not built to fly. Sirius had to experiment with weightless charms to figure out how to get it airborne, locomotion spells to make sure the wheels would still roll forwards with only the mere friction provided by air, strengthening charms for the parts of the bike that were not built to take on the sort of wind resistance that came with flying. Once he'd found the perfect cocktail of spells, it was a matter of building the enhancement into the bike, so that she could switch seamlessly between roaring along the road and lifting off into the air. Remus thought it was childish. Peter thought it was insane. James thought it was the coolest bloody idea he'd ever had. Lily said that she was staying out of it, though she bought Sirius a helmet and absolutely insisted that he wear it. "I don't give a shit about how pretty your hair looks, Black. I'll not have your skull cracked open in the middle of the road just for vanity's sake." Now, after hours and hours of experimentation, Sirius was sure he'd almost got it. There were just a few tweaks that he needed to perfect before weaving the spell into the bike itself, and then, of course, there would be the trial and error period of actually learning to fly it. He had already decided not to tell Lily and Remus when he was testing it. What they didn't know couldn't hurt them. Sirius grabbed the notebook that he'd been using to keep track of the changing spell work, smudging motor oil into the pages as he flipped through them. He sat cross-legged on the garage floor, muttering to himself. If he used a locomotion spell that relied more on intent rather than direction, then maybe... He grinned, scribbling a few notes. That was it. He'd definitely cracked it. Sirius read back over what he'd written before tossing the notebook aside, pulling out his wand and pointing it at the bike. He opened his mouth to cast a spell and... "Sirius?" Sirius blinked, shaking his head. That was weird. For a moment, it had sounded like Mooney was in the garage. Sirius glanced around, feeling silly. He was entirely alone. He shook his head, turning back to the bike. "Sirius, come here." Okay, that time he had definitely heard something. Sirius spun around, wand raised, but nobody was there. He frowned. Was he imagining things? It had sounded just like Mooney's voice. Unsettled, Sirius put away his wand, deciding to go back to the flat to check on things just in case. Maybe Remus had gotten back early from the meeting and was just sitting in the living room, bored out of his mind and trying to find some sort of new summoning spell. That was probably it. "Mooney?" he shouted as he opened the door, kicking off his shoes. Sure enough, Remus was there, though it didn't look like he'd been sitting around waiting. He was standing in the middle of the living room, in just his thin t-shirt and trousers, which was unusual. Not that Sirius was complaining. Typically, he preferred to keep his jumper on. He was still self-conscious about his scars. "You're here," Remus said, spinning around to face him. He was breathing hard, like he'd just run up the stairs. "Yeah, weirdest thing." Sirius shook his head, nudging the door shut behind him. "I was just working on the bike up the road, and then I dunno, I could have sworn I heard your voice. But if you'd only just got back, then it can't have been..." Before he could finish speaking, Remus was on him, slamming him back against the door and kissing him until he could hardly breathe. Sirius kissed him back automatically, more than a little shocked. But then Remus's fingers wrapped around his wrists, and a knee slid between his legs, and he found himself melting into the firm grip as Mooney kissed down his neck, teeth nipping at his throat. "Bloody hell," Sirius gasped, panting. "Are you all right?" Remus moaned, and Sirius felt the vibrations against his neck. "Just wanted to." Sirius shifted slightly, moving his hip, and oh! Remus was already hard. As Sirius pressed against him, he hissed, dropping his head onto Sirius's shoulder, squeezing his wrists. There was a sudden jolt, static and crackling, like someone had just injected pure electricity into his veins. "Fuck!" Sirius groaned, as the buzzing spread through him. Was that you? You feel... What's... Magic," Remus stammered, sounding half mad. There was so much. I just... That was enough explanation for Sirius. He felt dizzy, drunk as the magic sang through him, lighting every cell in his body on fire. He pushed Remus back, grabbing his arm and stumbling towards the bedroom, determined to make it to the bed before he collapsed right there on the floor. "Need you," Sirius mumbled, barely able to form a coherent thought. His mind felt like mush, lost completely in the sensation of cloth against skin as he tugged his shirt off, then the warm heat as he slid his fingers under Remus's. "Need to feel you everywhere." "Yes," Remus moaned, sounding just as wrecked. "Yes, yes." The magic poured out of him, electrifying until it was everywhere, pressed into Sirius's skin through Remus's palms, kissed into his mouth, inhaled with each breath. Sirius was talking, mumbling nonsense that he couldn't even hear as they fell back onto the bed, chest to chest, skin fever-hot and pressed together. Mooney's mouth was at his neck, hands sliding down his sides, and Sirius wanted more. He wanted everything, everywhere, all at once. Remus bucked against him, and he arched in response, hips snapping forward until they were both groaning, shuddering, coming undone in a snarl of limbs and heat and frantic wanting. Sirius fell apart. He saw stars. The magic was still there as they collapsed, panting onto the mattress. It fizzed in their blood, hot and sparking. They had to go for 2 more rounds before it had finally calmed down enough that Sirius no longer felt like he was about to combust every time Remus touched him. "If you're planning to visit the Aura's office again," he said breathlessly, "I'm going to need some more warning." "So," Remus slapped a hand over Mooney's mouth before he could finish speaking, turning to grin at him. "Don't you dare apologize. I mean, fucking hell." Remus shrugged him off, laughing, and waved a lazy hand towards the window. Instantly, it slid open, and a cool winter breeze twisted inside. Wow, Sirius blinked at the effortless display of wandless magic. "How long does that last?" "It's going away," Remus murmured, leaning back onto the pillows and closing his eyes. "Last time Snape's curse drained it, so I suppose any kind of counter-magic works." "Well," Sirius smirked, rolling over and running his fingers along Mooney's hip, "I prefer this to cursing you." Remus smiled, eyes still closed. Sirius watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, propping himself up on an elbow. "So," he said after a minute, "it either went really, really well, or really badly at the Ministry." "Both," Remus muttered, flinging an arm over his face. "Do we have to talk about it?" Yeah, I think we do." Remus sighed and sat up, fumbling for his pack of cigarettes. Sirius waited, watching him. "Greybacks in England," he said. Sirius felt as though he'd swallowed a stone. He sat up, reaching to take a cigarette. He held Remus's gaze as he lit it. "Tell me everything." Wednesday, the 10th of January, 1979, 2:13 a.m. They want him to go with them. With them? For the moons, at least. James frowned, studying Sirius's face. "And he's going to do it?" Sirius snorted. "Of course he is." He shoved his hands into his pockets, scuffing a shoe against the ground. "It's Mooney." They were on guard duty outside the house of an elderly witch, who, apparently, specialised in brewing rare potions. According to Moody, she'd been supplying the Order with elixirs and tonics that you couldn't just grab off the shelf from any old apothecary. There had been no direct threat against her, as far as they could tell. but after what had happened with Curbshack, the Order was no longer taking any risks. They had members guarding the homes of any suppliers deemed vital to the war effort. James nodded, looking troubled. Sirius had finished recounting the details of Moody's meeting at the Aura's office, how Ferrex and Moody had noticed that a werewolf activity tended to be concentrated in or around magical woodland, how they had started tracking that activity and managed to zero in on one particular forest, how Greyback had been spotted in London again for the first time since the 60s, how they had put two and two together and figured that he and his pack must be planning something, which meant, by extension, that Voldemort was planning something. So, 3 moons? James asked. Sirius nodded. That's what they told Remus, back in July. Anyone who wants to meet Greyback has to spend 3 full moons with the pack. And then what? Sirius clenched and then unclenched his jaw, curling his hands into fists. He wanted a cigarette. He doesn't know. Oh, James swallowed. Right. They were quiet for a bit, staring out at the dark row of houses. It was well past midnight. The sun would be rising in just a few short hours. Finally, James asked, "How's he feeling about it?" Sirius shrugged. "He's all right, I guess. Calm. He doesn't seem worried about it. But you are?" Sirius nodded. James blew out a breath. "We could talk to Moody. Ask him if..." "No," Sirius cut him off. "We're not even supposed to know. Moody told Remus that he couldn't tell anyone, not even Order members." "Oh," James blinked, looking a bit surprised by that. "What was he supposed to tell us, then? We'd have noticed if he'd disappeared every full moon." "Yeah, but they don't know we're usually with him for them, do they? Suppose they thought he'd be able to get away with just letting us think he was doing whatever he normally does." James nodded. "Right." More silence. A car drove down the road, slowly. Too slowly. Headlights blindingly bright. They both tensed, murmuring concealment charms and drawing closer into the shadows of the house. But it passed by, without slowing or stopping, zooming off into the distance. Sirius supposed it was unlikely that Death Eaters would show up in a Muggle vehicle, but you could never be too careful. "Sirius," James said quietly. He'll be all right. Moody wouldn't give him a mission if he wasn't ready for it. And besides, he's done it before." "I know," Sirius mumbled, staring out at the empty road. James reached over and squeezed his arm, a comforting gesture. Sirius smiled at him. "He'll be all right," James repeated firmly, as though speaking the words could make them true.
You can hear the old one say, "Was the sound last night the wind? Can you feel the change begin?" By the fall of the
Chapter 157. The War, the Mission. Saturday the 13th of January, 1979. First moon. "I hate this," Sirius said, sucking hard on his 3rd cigarette. "I know you do," Remus sighed, sounding exhausted. They had both slept poorly the previous night. Remus had been grinding his teeth again, and Sirius hadn't been able to stop tossing and turning, mind spinning with everything that might happen on this mission, all the ways it could go wrong. I really hate this," Sirius exhaled, standing on his tiptoes to blow smoke out at the top window. It was too cold outside to open it all the way, and Sirius shivered when the freezing air brushed against his face, wrapping an arm that wasn't holding a cigarette around his waist. Behind him, Remus was spread across the sofa, with a cold flannel on his forehead. He'd been complaining about a headache, which wasn't unusual so close to the moon. "It's bloody mental, sending you out on your own," Sirius scowled, staring out the window. "Why can't I go with you? I could go as Padfoot." "No," Remus said for the millionth time. "You'll still smell human. They'd tear you apart." "What if they tear you apart?" Sirius shot back, turning around. He was trying not to make a fuss, really he was, but he couldn't stop the fear that crept into his voice. "Me?" Remus waved a hand dismissively. "Greyback's prodigal son. Not likely." "What's a prodigal son?" "Oh, Right. Just means I'm gonna get a warm welcome. Gaius said not to hurt me. Livia called me her brother. Gaius. That was the werewolf from the mission in July, the one who'd attacked him. And Livia... Could I come with you just for a bit? Just before anyone else shows up? Remus looked at him, with something like pity in his eyes. It's not safe, Padfoot. Sirius turned away, stubbing out his cigarette with a bit more force than was necessary on the windowsill. He didn't want pity. He wanted Remus to say he could go. He wanted Remus to not go at all. Why don't you just go to the Potters? Mooney said carefully. Don't spend the night here all by yourself. I don't care where I spend the night, Sirius huffed, flopping down on the armchair. Well, I do. Remus frowned reproachfully. I need to know where to go after the moon's down. Shit. Yeah, Sirius straightened, feeling a kick of guilt. Once again, he'd only been thinking about himself, about his stupid own emotions. Okay, I'll go to the Potters. Then if you need any patching up, Euphemia will be on hand. Fuck, what happens if you can't apparate? What if you... I'll send a Patronus. But what if you're not strong enough? I will be. They regarded each other for a moment. Remus with the same calm, steady gaze he'd been levelling at Sirius all day, every time he began to panic or started asking questions. How would Remus even know he was in the right spot? How many werewolves would there be? How would he know they were the right werewolves? From their neighbour's flat, there was a soft, familiar chiming. They'd never properly introduced themselves, only waved politely when they'd passed each other in the halls. But the elderly couple next door had a grandfather clock, which went off every hour and could be heard clearly through the walls. Now Sirius and Remus listened as it struck 4. Remus pushed himself up, stretching, and tossing the flannel into a corner. I'd better get going. No. Sirius stared at him helplessly. Not yet. Remus shook his head fondly, moving over to the armchair. He brushed a few strands of hair away from Sirius's face, then leant down to kiss his forehead. Go to the Potters. I'll be fine. Honestly, you go on missions all the time. Not like this, Sirius protested. Defensive stuff, guard duty, carrying messages, not... Remus shrugged. Someone has to do it, he said simply. I'd rather it was me. Sirius watched him move over to the door, crouching down to tie his shoes. He wished he didn't feel so helpless. Wished that there was something, anything, that he could do besides watch Remus leave. He trailed behind him, hovering in the doorway that led to the kitchen. Once Mooney had finished tying his shoes, he stood, and they hugged. Sirius twisted his fingers into the other boy's shirt, gripping it as tightly as he could, not wanting to ever let go. I love you, he said, pressing his face into Mooney's shoulder. It was the first time either of them had said it since Hope's funeral, and Sirius wasn't sure if I love you too. Remus twisted slightly, just enough to press a kiss against his temple. And I'll see you soon, I promise. And then he turned, and the door slammed shut behind him, and Sirius was left standing in their flat, alone. Are you sure I can't get you anything else, love? Mrs. Potter asked, handing him a cup of tea. Sirius smiled up at her weakly. No, sorry, just not very hungry. She smiled sympathetically, patting his cheek. Well, if you change your mind, just give Gully a ring. I'm off to bed. Not getting any younger, I'm afraid. Nowadays I seem to be knackered the moment the sun is set. Good night, Sirius said, sipping his tea. She leaned down to kiss his forehead before leaving the kitchen, humming under her breath as she headed up the stairs. Sirius sighed, slumping down in his seat. He'd forgotten that James was taking Lily out for dinner this evening, and Fleamont was locked away in his office as usual, so it had only been Euphemia for company once he'd arrived at the Potters. Sirius loved Effie, like he was his own mother. Actually, loved her quite a bit more than he loved his own mother. But neither she nor Mr. Potter were as spry as they used to be, and though she made up for it in pleasant company, she was not exactly the ideal person to distract Sirius from his current dark thoughts. He had mostly just helped her with the washing up, while she finished baking a treacle tart for a neighbour. Sirius stood, still nursing his cup of tea, and moved over to the window. The sky was clear outside, stars winking down from their lofty perch. The moon was bloated, swollen, pale and taunting. Sirius stared up at it, wondering where Mooney was, if he was safe, if he was hurt, if he was surrounded by other wolves. He had seemed so certain that they wouldn't hurt him, but Sirius wasn't sure. He lifted a hand absent-mindedly to his chest, tracing over his ribcage. "Badfoot!" James smiled, walking into the kitchen from the living room entrance and brushing off his shirt. He must have come through the flu. "I didn't know you were coming over. You should have called me on the mirror." Sirius shrugged. "Your mum told me you were out with Lily. Didn't want to interrupt." "Right." James caught sight of the expression on his face, glancing out the window at the moon. "Are you staying here tonight, then?" "Yeah." Sirius turned back to the window, nodding. Figured it would be best for Mooney in the morning. You know, if he's hurt or anything. I'm sort of rubbish at healing spells. I thought your mum would be better. "Of course," James nodded earnestly. "Sorry, should have thought of that. Where is Mum? Am I allowed to eat that?" He pointed at the tart. Sirius smiled grudgingly. "No, I'm under strict orders to keep you away from it. And she went up to bed. She said she was tired." "Oh." James's smile tightened marginally. "Right." Sirius watched him, studying his face. His parents were still in good health, all things considered, but Sirius could tell that James was feeling the effects of their ageing just as much as his mum and dad were. Fremont and Euphemia had always been on the older side of the spectrum, as far as parents went. James once told Sirius that his mum used to call him her happy surprise. Apparently they hadn't thought they were capable of having children, but their youthful vigour had always made them seem younger, and it had been quite a bit of shock when Sirius realised Euphemia would be turning 62 that year, and Fremont was 3 years older. Still, going to bed a bit earlier didn't mean anything dire. Sirius had plenty of great aunts and uncles that had lived well into their 90s, and he was pretty sure that Dumbledore was nearly 100. Their headmaster was certainly still lively enough. Sirius was sure that Mr. and Mrs. Potter would be around for a long time yet. They were just so steady, a permanent fixture of the boys' lives. Sirius couldn't imagine James without them. "How's Mrs. Prongs?" he asked, finishing the last of his tea. James relaxed again, eyes going dreamy in the way they always did when he talked about Lily. "Good," she sighed. "She likes her job in the potions research department. Eats lunch with Marlene every day, on their break. I'm trying to convince McKinnon to bring Danny over sometime. Play some Quidditch, you know." Sirius moved to the sink and began washing his mug. "That'd be fun." "Yeah. Petunia's still a bitch. No changes there. Hasn't invited Lily over to see the new house, even though it's been months. Lily's sister had moved out after the wedding to live with her new husband, and apparently she only ever invited the family over to visit when her younger sister just so happened to be busy." Sirius snorted, shaking his head. James went on. "Moody's asked her to brew Verita serum for the order, so she's been working on that in her free time. And she's been talking about taking a Muggle typing course." "What?" Sirius wrinkled his nose. "Like the one Mary's done?" James nodded. "Why?" "Well," James scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "She says it's just in case, you know, if the Death Eaters get more of a foothold in the Ministry. Malfoy's proposed that new reform, to have all Muggle-born wizards registered with the Ministry. And Mary and Lily think if it all goes through, then the hiring discrimination will just get even worse." "What?" Sirius frowned. He usually zoned out at the political part of the Order meetings, not paying close attention to the discussions of policies and reforms. It wasn't like any of it involved him. He didn't work for the Ministry. "She thinks she won't be able to find a wizarding job?" "Well, once her apprenticeship ends, she'll have to apply if she wants to work full-time at St. Mungo's. Or if she wants to do potions research somewhere else. And apparently it's a lot harder, you know, if you want pure blood. She was telling me about the statistics. I never even knew." Sirius frowned, considering this. "Me neither," he muttered, drying his mug and putting it away. He turned. "But she won't have to worry about that, will she? Once we win, people like the Malfoys will be locked away." "We don't know for sure that the Malfoys are Death Eaters." "They are," Sirius said firmly. "Trust me. They were always there, at the meetings." "Yeah, but..." James sighed, switching tacts. I mean, even aside from the war and everything, this isn't anything new. Lily was telling me it all goes back way before you-know-who. It used to be impossible for Muggle-born wizards to find jobs. It's only recently that things have started to get a bit better. I mean, at least before. He waved a hand aimlessly. Sirius didn't need to ask what he meant. At least before Voldemort. At least before the war. They were quiet for a moment then. Sirius frowned stubbornly and said, "Evans is brilliant. She'll be able to find a job. She doesn't need some silly Muggle typing course." James laughed. "Well, there's no need to get up in arms about it. She just mentioned it. I don't think she's really too keen on the idea anyway." "Things will be different," Sirius insisted, not entirely sure why it felt so important to him. "When we win the war." James smiled at him, bemused, and reached out to clap a hand on his shoulder. "I know, Pads," he agreed. "Things will be different." Sunday, the 14th of January, 1979. Sirius didn't sleep. He lay awake in the overlarge bed, staring up at the ceiling until his eyes ached. There was too much empty space on the mattress. He wasn't used to sleeping alone. He'd drawn the curtains over the window, sick with the sight of the moon, so he had no idea how much time had passed, but it must have been dawn, because suddenly a voice startled him out of his lazy half-consciousness, through which he'd been floating. "Are you awake?" "Moony!" Sirius sat bolt upright, squinting through the dark towards the door. Remus crossed the room quickly, in 3 long strides, and stopped short at the end of the bed, hovering. "Are you okay?" Sirius asked, scanning for injuries. "Yeah," Remus assured him quickly. "It was fine. It was nothing. We just hunted." "Hunted?" "Rabbits," Remus added, licking his lips. He smelled different than usual. Less sweetness, less warmth. More wild and green. Honestly, it was fine. Easy. "I was so worried about you. I didn't even sleep." Sirius trailed off as Remus continued to hover at the edge of the bed. "Don't you want to get in?" He pulled back the blankets, confused. Moony was always exhausted after the transformation. Remus fidgeted, glancing down. "I'm a bit on edge." Sirius blinked sleepily, trying to figure out what the hell that meant. Sensing his confusion, Remus prompted, "You know, like the other day?" "Oh!" Sirius thought of the swollen magic buzzing through his veins. He reached out to skim his fingers along Remus's arm. Sure enough, there was an instant lick of heat down his spine. The same tingly electric feeling. "So you are." Sirius licked his lips, the combination of magic and lack of sleep making him feel dizzy and drunk. He reached for Moony's hips, warm skin, sharp hip bones, and even more delicious, crackling magic. Sirius curled his fingers into the waistband of Moony's jeans, pulling him closer, wanting to feel him. "That's okay. I can sleep later." They did sleep, eventually, once they were both boneless and sweaty and panting. Sirius curled up in Moony's arms and didn't wake till 5 o'clock that evening, feeling more well-rested than he had in ages. Remus told him about the moon when they woke up. They sat cross-legged on the mattress, and he talked about running with the pack, hunting rabbits and howling to the sky. Afterwards, he said he'd spoken with Gaius and Livia. They told him that Greyback wanted to meet him. He just needed to spend 2 more moons with the pack. Sirius hugged him tightly and stroked his hair, and wished desperately that he could ask him not to go back. Sunday, the 11th of February, 1979. Second moon. Everything was perfectly fine. Over the next month, things went back to normal. They slept tangled in each other's arms and ate breakfast together, when they remembered to buy groceries, and visited their friends. Sirius had his order missions and his bike, and Remus had the phone, which he almost exclusively used to call Grant, and his books, and everything was fine. Everything was good. Except that they were still sleeping poorly, waking each other in the night with their tossing and turning. Except the full moon drew closer, steadily, and both Moody and Ferox had agreed that Remus should spend it once more with the werewolves. Except that Sirius would look over at Remus sometimes, and find he was far away, gazing at the window at night, staring up at the sky. Sometimes he almost looked wistful, eager. Sirius tried to ignore it, tried to shake off the cold shiver of unease that burrowed into his spine. Remus didn't like the missions any more than he did. He was only doing it because Moody had asked him to, and there was nobody else, and they had all agreed that they would do anything to help the Order win. It was all for the greater good, really. It was bloody noble of Mooney, risking his life for them. Sirius should have felt proud of him for his bravery, his determination. Instead, he just felt sick. He tried not to show it as he kissed Remus goodbye. It wasn't like it would do either of them any good. Mooney pulled him in for a hug, and Sirius clutched him so fiercely that his knuckles went right. "I love you." "Love you too." Remus left, shut the door behind him. Sirius was alone. James and Lily were waiting for him at the Potters this time, ushering him into the dining room for one of Euphemia's home-cooked meals. They chatted about their days, focusing only on the most mundane details. Lily's supervisor had taken to wearing yellow robes, which quite decidedly did not suit her. Peter had invited James to a Puddlemere match after winning tickets in the lottery at work. The weather would be getting warmer soon, and they'd need to decide what to plant in the Potters' front garden this year. Sirius slept fitfully in his old bedroom, tossing and turning in the large empty bed. He woke at dawn and went downstairs, waiting at the door for Remus to return, staring out the window at the rising sun. He didn't come back. When Mrs. Potter came down an hour later, she startled, flicking on the lights. "Goodness! Sirius!" she chuckled breathlessly. "You gave me quite a fright." "Sorry," he murmured. "Just waiting for Remus." "Oh, yes, of course, dear." She began to bustle around the kitchen, and Gully appeared at her side, helping prepare breakfast. "I'm sure he's on his way. Probably just didn't have the energy to apparate, poor love." "Do you think we could go and find him?" Sirius started to stand, but Euphemia gestured for him to sit down. "Give him a bit of time, dear. Here, help me set the table." By the time breakfast was served, however, Sirius wasn't the only one anxious. James and Lily kept glancing at the clock, and when Mrs. Potter's cheerful optimism finally began to crack, she hovered by the window, peering out every few seconds. Sirius was beginning to feel properly panicky, ready to jump up and insist they go look for him, when Remus finally returned. Mrs. Potter leapt to her feet and yanked the door open, exclaiming, "There you are!" Remus stumbled inside, eyes a bit glazed. "Sorry." "Oh my God! Mooney, are you okay?" Lily rushed over, staring in horror at his face and his neck. He was covered in dry blood, a deep brownish red. For a moment Sirius's heart leapt into his throat. That he inhaled deeply, sniffing, and he realized it wasn't human. It wasn't his. Shit. Remus glanced down, as if only just noticing that the blood was there. "It's not mine. It's not." James came to stand beside Lily, staring wide-eyed at the mess. Remus stared back at them, helplessly, steadying himself against the wall. "Come on, Mooney." Sirius brushed past their friends, taking Remus's hand gently. "Let's get you cleaned up." Remus followed him obediently up to the bathroom, where he waited as Sirius ran a bath. Once the tub was full, he stepped inside and waited while Mooney stripped, leaving his filthy clothes in a pile on the floor before sinking into the warm water. It turned red, slowly, as the blood washed away. "It's not human," Remus murmured, staring down at the water. "I know," Sirius told him. "It's deer. I can smell it." They'd never hunted deer on the moons. Not with prongs, of course. But Sirius didn't say that. "You can." Remus blinked up at him, surprised. Sirius nodded. "I have to concentrate, but yeah. I was talking to Prongs about it. The longer we're animagi, the more weird things we notice. I hope I don't go colourblind next day." Remus tried to laugh, but it came out shaky and stilted. Sirius watched him. He still had that glazed look in his eye. "Was it bad?" Sirius asked softly, after a moment. Remus stared down at the water, a series of inscrutable emotions flickering across his face. And then he looked back up at Sirius, helplessly. "Yeah," he nodded. "It was bad." Monday the 13th of March, 1979. Third moon. "I don't want to go back to the Potters this time," Remus said, minutes before he was due to leave for his final moon with the werewolves. "What?" Sirius asked, not sure if he'd heard that correctly. He left the kitchen, where he'd been washing up the dishes, still wearing the bright yellow marigolds that Remus had bought him. He was pretty sure they were supposed to be a joke, but they were actually quite useful. Suds dripped from the gloves onto the carpet as he stood in the living room, staring. "I said I don't want to go back to the Potters," Remus repeated. "In the morning. You can stay there, obviously, but I just won't, okay? I don't know how safe it is. I don't want anyone to follow me." Where is this coming from? Sirius continued to stare at him, utterly baffled. "We've been fine so far." "I think we've been careless," Remus countered. "I won't put them in danger again." "Okay," Sirius nodded, carefully peeling off his gloves. "Where do you want to go, then?" "I don't know. I thought maybe Cornwall. That castle we visited, do you remember?" "Of course I remember. Shall I meet you there?" "Wait for my signal. I want it to be safe." Remus fidgeted, glancing around the room. Sirius frowned. "Moony, if it's not safe, then I'd rather be there so I can help. I know Prongs and Wormtail and Evans will too." "No!" Remus snapped, voice raising slightly. "No, please." "But Moony—" "Look, I have to go." Remus brushed past him, shoving out of the door before Sirius could say another word. Sirius followed after him, rushing out to the landing, but Remus was already gone. He arrived in Cornwall just before the dawn. He sat on the crumbled castle wall, staring out towards the sea, watching the sunrise. He waited.